Morning, Ben. Thanks for sending some slides through again.
Hello.
I will hand over to you and go straight on to the next slide.
Great. So autumn is well and truly upon us now. If John Keats had been a better poet, this is what he would have written: season of mists and pasteurellosis. Because I can't move for lambs with pasteurellosis at the moment. I've seen lots of cases where large numbers of lambs affected on one farm in a sort of outbreak fashion, sometimes vaccinated, sometimes not. So the pasteurellosis, as the next slide shows, that's the main thing, but that's the main thing that I've been seeing, autumn pasteurellosis. Then secondarily, because it's autumn and it's been a mast year, we should mention acorn poisoning because there's been a lot of that, and then some other messages at the end just while we're here. So I think the first thing to discuss is the pasteurellosis, which is always, as this graph shows, you always get a spike in autumn. Sometimes it's a dramatic spike, like it probably has been this year, because it has been quite a sudden change from, quite benign weather to quite cold nights and stressful weather. And we've had a few days where it's done nothing but rain, and we've had a few storms that'll stress out the lambs. And as you can see from this graph, the peak is in October and November. Next slide shows that how pasteurella works. The received wisdom is that lambs have pasteurella in their throats all the time, and then for reasons that aren't completely understood, they get a stressor, and then the pasteurella that's already in their throats pops out and causes either pneumonia or septicemia. Now, those stressors are the usual ones of bad weather, a worm burden, trace element deficiency, poor nutrition, and if lambs are housed, sometimes ventilation. So those are all the usual suspects that weaned lambs have to face in the autumn. And if you're unlucky, some of those stress factors will cause the pasteurella to become a normal inhabitant of the back of the throat, to causing pneumonia, like in this picture on the right here, where you've got that stiff purple consolidation in the front part of the lungs. So the next slide shows the pathology that you see. There are two types. This is slightly academic. The one on the left is Mannheimia hemolytica. That gives you pneumonia. The pictures on the right, Albibasteinia trachelosi, they give you septicemia. The interesting thing about this year, as the next slide shows, is that, as I said before, if you have worms, then that is a strong risk factor for having pasteurella if all the other factors are present, like if there's some trace element deficiency or if the weather triggers it. Now, in lots of cases this year, I've seen people gather worm with a group 1, 2 or 3, then there's been a storm, then they've had an outbreak of pasteurellosis, and importantly, when they've done the check for the risk factors for pasteurella, there have been worm eggs present at around the post-dosing interval for that wormer, i.e. there has been resistance to that wormer, and therefore you may as well not have wormed those lambs, and the worms have continued to be a risk factor for the pasteurellosis, and that's what's been the trigger most likely. So that I've seen that happen quite a bit this time, and they've had to worm them again, say with Zolvix or a group 5, and that has done the trick. So that's been the trigger, and you do not want to find out that you've got worm resistance by having a big outbreak of pasteurellosis. So this is possibly another reason for considering a brake drench in the back end, and
good reason to do a bit of monitoring before you have a disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's plenty of lambs with worms at the moment, and every time you use a group 1, 2, 3, it's a good idea to do a fecal egg count reduction test or a worm efficacy test. So that's pasteurellosis, important now with all the mistiness. We should mention acorns because it's been a mast year, and everywhere you look there's been acorns, it seems, up and down the country. I heard a bloke on Radio 4 the other day saying that he'd lost a few lambs with acorns, and certainly I've seen 15, 20 cases of acute overt poisoning with acorns on the table in sheep and cattle, and it's very difficult to know what to do. Move them if you can, fence the acorns off, and just be aware that they are a clear and present danger, and they cause kidney failure, which can take 2, 3, 4 weeks to kill the animal. So yes, it's a clear and present danger at the moment if you've any oak trees about. And then 2 more messages at the moment. Up in this part of the world, we have lambs that are going away to winter keep. They may not have gone yet, but that's the plan. I think it's important to prepare those important replacement females, which is probably what they are, for where they're going, i.e. make sure they aren't deficient, because where they're going, they may not be looked at as often as you would like if you're not doing it yourself. They do want to be wormed before you go, but obviously you'd want to dose them probably with a group 4 and 5 so that it's killing all the encysted larvae in the abomaser, but B, it's killing all the potentially resistant worms. But the important thing is to dose, wait, a few days and then move them, so that you're not dosing and moving them, which is obviously very strongly selective for any resistant worms. And this year, the fluke, because it's been so dry until recently, they may not need a fluke drench. So it may be worth testing them to see whether they do or not. And I would get, what do you think, that they may not? It may be a bit early. So the monitoring may have to continue where they're going.
Very hit and miss this year. Some some areas we know there's fluke activity already, and others not at all. So I think it's farm specific this year, and the only way to know for sure is to do a bit of checking. Yeah,
and they would be good animals to do blood tests, because obviously they won't have antibodies from previous years, those away wintered hogs. And then the last point is, obviously lots of people at the moment are buying in tups and females, and the quarantine dose is extremely important. So any that are going to be bought in, give them a quarantine dose, which is basically a group 4 and a group 5. And don't forget about scab if that's a risk. We were just having a conversation, weren't we, Matt, about what do you do if you've forgotten?
I think if they've gone out to a field that's going to be reseeded next year, or away on their own, they've taken what worms they've got onto that field anyway. So you might as well just bring them in, dose them, and put them straight back on that field. And then you're limiting the damage. And especially if you can reseed that field, or it's going to be in a crop rotation, then it's not a disaster. But ideally, you want to do it on the way in, not as an afterthought.
Definitely. That's, put it in the diary and make sure you do it every time as a routine.
In the north, we're still seeing farms that haven't got hemoncus that are buying it in.
Yeah, I think that's the commonest way of acquiring it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Makes it very important.
Yeah, it's a good one to avoid if you can.
Agreed. But I think the most important message this week, as this last slide shows, is to make sure you know that your resistant status, because you do not want to find out that you've got resistant worms. I mean, the worms are bad enough, but the pasteurella outbreak that it sometimes triggers is a very unpleasant and demoralizing event. So you really want to know that you either are using a wormer that's going to be effective, or if you don't know, then make that the time for your break dose, and watch the weather for risk factors for pasteurellosis, because it really is an important trigger, is either resistant worms or continual challenge by worms for these outbreaks of pasteurella that are happening at the moment, and will, as that graph shows, continue to happen throughout October and November. So it really isn't too late. And they've had a bit of a weather hit. I think that certainly up here they've had a bit of a weather hit recently, have these weaned lambs. So that's the thought I would leave you with.
Absolutely, Ben. Control what you can control, and managing the worm challenge is definitely one of those things.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. See you next time.